Hello gang, Tattooed Biker here with you, and tonight we're headed to a world where darkness waits and the eyes are as black as the night itself. Tonight we explore the eerie realm of black-eyed kids and beings as I share stories from those who have actually encountered this bizarre and terrifying phenomenon. Get ready for reports that will make you question what really hides in the darkest corners of our world. Now, lock your doors, grab your gear, and let's ride. Number 1. Dear Biker, I had an encounter with something unexplained. I still have chills from this, and even though my encounter doesn't match 100% to others that I've heard, I'm positive it has something to do with these black-eyed kids. So this is about April 2019. I live in a decent-sized city in the western U.S. My job at the time was in a restaurant where I worked late nights, sometimes till 1 a.m. The job wasn't far from my apartment, so I would walk back every night. My place is in kind of a run-down part of town. Imagine a lot of abandoned lots. Basically, at that time of night, there wouldn't be anyone around except maybe people like me making their way home. So, as I'm walking down the road leading up to my place one night, I'm looking down at my phone, and when I lift my head up, I see these two kids, maybe 40 to 50 feet away, holding hands and walking in my direction. This was odd because the road is a pretty straight shot. There wouldn't have been many alleys or side streets for them to come out of unless they were just hanging out in one of the empty lots. They were too far away to make out any detail, but I was sure they had to be young kids. That on its own was unsettling, but the way they started behaving after this was what sent me into caution mode. These two stepped off the curb, looked both ways, and crossed the street. There was no need to do that on a completely deserted road, but I thought, whatever kids are taught to look both ways before crossing. That would have been fine, except then, after maybe walking 10 more feet, they stepped off again, looked both ways, and crossed back over to the side they were just on. They did this 4 or 5 times until they were right in front of me. I could tell at this point that it was a boy about 13 and a girl of about 9. Their clothing wasn't exactly like other BEK accounts I've heard, where they're wearing like these old-timey clothes. Instead, they had these gray pajama-looking things and white shoes with no logo or branding. Now, I'm a big dude, about 6'1" and 240 pounds. I've been stopped by all kinds of junkies and weirdos and have always thought that I could handle myself. Despite that, I felt terrified of these two little kids. They came up to me, and even though they avoided looking directly at me, either looking down or at each other, like they were intentionally trying to hide their eyes. I caught a brief glance at the boy's eyes as he was taller, and I swear, his eyes were solid black. And I don't mean dark, no. This was something else, like his eye sockets. Where an eyeball should have been was just an impossibly black void. They stopped dead in front of me, and the boy said, "We're lost. Our parents must be worried." In a straight monotone voice, and you'd think that 2 lost children in the rough part of town at 1 a.m. would be frantic and crying. But then the girl chimes in. "We need to use your phone, the one at your house. Our parents must be worried." She talked in that same matter-of-fact way. I told them they could use my cell phone or I could call the police for them. They didn't say anything, and the boy just said again, "Our parents must be worried." Now, in no other situation would I ever leave 2 kids there defenseless, but something in my gut told me that I had to get the hell out of there. So I just quickly walked past them. After about a block, I looked back and saw them continuing in the other direction, repeatedly crossing the street again. It was one of the most unsettling things that I've ever experienced. Signed, Bradley. Number 2. Hey, Tattooed Biker. My mother and I were watching a movie late one evening about 12 years ago. It was the summer, so I didn't have to worry about school or anything. And we heard someone knocking on our door. Now, we lived in an apartment complex and figured it was one of the neighbors or our cousins who lived across the parking lot from us. My mom opened the door and I went with her, since the kitchen was beside the door so I could grab a snack. We both instantly felt uncomfortable as we approached that door, and I could see that she was talking to a kid who couldn't have been any older than around 8. And she was asking to come in because she couldn't find her mother. And she was very, very persistent about coming in. For some reason, my mom and I were dead set on refusing her. So she offered to hand her her phone. She nodded, and then she went to grab her phone from the table by the door, and when she looked back, the girl was just gone. My mom was freaked out, and so was I. She told me that the part that made her the most uncomfortable was that her eyes were completely black, but she played it off as just some trick of the light. Eventually, some years later, I was reading about myths and legends and the supernatural, and I came across something called black-eyed kids, and I nearly pissed myself. This was in the suburbs of Indianapolis, Indiana. We later found out, and it was in the news, that the apartment complex had been built on top of sacred native land. Now, I don't know if that had a relation to the black-eyed kid, but it did make me wonder. I still believe, for whatever reason, that that girl was some kind of spirit. I think that she simply vanished like a ghost would. My mom doesn't share my sentiment. Signed, Katrina. Number 3. Hey, TB. This happened to me a few months ago. I'm a freshman in college here in South Carolina. When my spring break started, instead of going to some crazy beach, I spent my week off at home. Because winter ended so early, I found myself mowing lawns about a month earlier than usual. I drove to an elderly woman's house to mow. I'd been mowing for her for about 4 years now. I used to live down the street, but I'd since moved away. But I kept the job because mowing is great money for the little work. She had been diagnosed with cancer and hasn't been doing well, in and out of the hospital, so I knew how to let myself in the garage through the back to open the garage door. I did a once-over around the outside of the house, just picking up sticks and lifting downspouts. I even threw a Nerf football back into the neighbor's yard. I went back into the front yard, and it was just a beautiful day outside. Now, I had lived here for my whole childhood, so I stood out in the driveway, just taking it all in. There was a couple out in their backyard and a few people walking, and everything else was very peaceful and quiet. Just a few folks were out and about. A nearly perfect afternoon, and I didn't think anything like this would ever happen. I saw my old next-door neighbors outside, and being the socially awkward person that I am, I wanted to avoid conversation, so I put my tinted safety glasses on, started up the mower, and popped in my headphones. I then pushed the mower into the backyard. Now, it was a big backyard, with 3 trees, 2 gardens, and an oddly shaped bench that was extremely hard to maneuver around. I was at least used to these things, having dealt with them for years, and I was just getting into my groove when I saw a kid out of the corner of my eye. He was just standing there in the backyard. I don't know how long he'd been there, or how he even made his way in without me seeing him. I jumped, startled as I wasn't used to ever being disturbed while I mowed. I pulled my headphones out, and he just looked at me from across the yard. He seemed pretty normal from where I was standing. It seemed a little hot to be wearing jeans and a sweatshirt, but I didn't think anything of it. He looked to be about 13 years old, but I'm horrible with guessing ages. I looked at him for a few seconds before I realized he wasn't going to say anything this far away, so I reluctantly turned off the mower. Now my senses were already working overtime, besides this ringing in my ears. And that's when the kid asked, "Can you help us?" Us, I think to myself. There's more than one? I suddenly got butterflies in my stomach because my keys, my wallet, and my cell phone were left out in the garage. I hurried to the front, and there was a second boy there, younger than the first by a few years. He didn't move his feet, and he just kept his eyes on me. I honestly didn't care how they were standing or looking. I just made a beeline for my valuables and made sure nothing was taken. I turned around with everything sorted in my pockets, and I jumped again. They had really closed in on me and were now looking up at me. And that's when I saw they had those damn black eyes. I suddenly felt so small and so mortal. Those eyes, that's all it took for me to realize that I wasn't nearly as in charge as I thought I was. "Can you help us?" the older boy asked. "We're thirsty and our dad wants to know where we are." My head is just spinning at this point. You see, I've read the stories before, and I know what they're up to, but I can't hide. It isn't my house. "There's a water fountain across the street," I say. I already know what they're going to say before they even said it. They said, "Just please, let us inside. We've been outside all day and we're very thirsty. You need to let us in." I responded with a firm no. I was trying hard not to look at them, and at least not at their eyes, but I wanted to learn more. I wanted to be able to describe them, so I just caught a glimpse of the little ones, pitch black and unblinking. I immediately thought I could hear his voice in my head, even though I'd never heard it. It was almost as if I was arguing with myself. I was fighting the voice as I was slowly taking steps back into the garage. The kids didn't move forward, and they didn't say anything else. They just stared, and I kept walking. Finally, I was close enough to hit the button to close the garage door. I could still see their feet, unmoving, as the door slowly closed down completely, forcing me into darkness. For about 3 seconds, I was relieved that I had escaped, but then I realized that I was trapped. I can't get into the main part of this lady's house, and I can't go back out the front. The only option is to leave through the back door that's always unlocked, the one that I initially came in through. I quickly checked for what I came with, when I realized that my keys, which I clearly remember stuffing into my pocket earlier, are now in the palm of my hand. It suddenly dawns on me that even though I can't remember it, but I almost gave them my keys. It's all too much for me to handle, and the darkness of the garage isn't helping, so I open the door and the sunlight washes over me. I felt so happy at that moment. It left me completely unprepared for what happened next. I closed the door and turned the corner to make my way to the front, and the oldest was alone, blocking my path. He then screamed at me. I asked nicely, "Let us in." I quickly spun around and bolted into the backyard. I didn't look back to see if I was being chased. I ran past the tree, past the mower I had left out, and I knew that the little one would be ready to meet me around the corner. And sure enough, he was there. And this side yard was much more narrow than the first. I put on a burst of speed and I knocked this kid down. I was about to feel bad until the little guy tried to bite my hand as I pushed him. I ran a few more strides. I was so close to my car parked on the street when I stopped. There was no traffic. Nobody had called my name. There was no reason for me to stop, except I did. The little boy was crying, and I had never heard somebody cry like that. It was crystal clear, like it was coming from my headphones. I turned around, and he was sitting up, sobbing. I wanted to walk back to them, help and apologize. I wanted to open the garage and find a way into the house to let them use the phone. It was weird. It was like I wanted to do everything in my power to help them all of a sudden. "Let us in. We need the house," he said through tears. Almost brainwashed a second time by an 8-year-old, no less. I couldn't believe it. I shook it off one last time and I ran into my car. I locked the doors and I didn't look back until I was on a different street. I had some hand sanitizer in the car and spread that crap all over myself. I didn't know if those 2 kids were infected with something or what. I called the lady's house to tell her that I hadn't finished and that I would be back tomorrow. Thankfully, she must have not been home. At least, she didn't answer. I went back and finished without any issue the next day. Signed, Greg. Number 4. Dear Biker, my experience with a black-eyed woman happened in mid-December of 2014. I was living in downtown Phoenix at the time and had just moved into my apartment the previous month. I was out with some friends that night and got home around 10 p.m. I had to be at work at 5 a.m., so I went straight to bed. I awoke to knocking on my door and thought, it's 2 a.m. Who the hell would be at my door? I laid my head back down, but then I heard knocking again. I peeked out my window to see who it was, and it was a young Hispanic woman who was very, very pale. She yelled, "I need your help." So I immediately sprung out of bed thinking this girl was in trouble. I instantly thought of my sister or mom if they were in that position that I hoped someone would help. I cracked the door open and asked, "Are you okay? What's wrong?" She said, "I need to use your phone." Her voice was very calm, but something was just off. She was about 5 feet 5 inches tall and about 18 to 20 years old or so. Everything about her seemed normal, but she had these strange glasses on and a really weird vibe. I told her, "Hold on and let me grab it." I went back into my room to grab my phone when I heard the door slowly open. I quickly began to have second thoughts about what I just did, opening the door to a stranger that early. I walked back out to give her my phone when I saw her lying on my couch. I told her, "Make it quick. I need to be at work in a few hours." As I said that, she turned her head towards me, took off her glasses, and smiled. I couldn't move. Her eyes were completely black, like someone had sharpied her eyeballs, and she had some type of black substance in her teeth. She stood up and eased her way towards me. I tossed her the phone, not wanting to be anywhere near this person. She grabbed it and made 2 calls, which later I found out were disconnected numbers. When she was done, I asked her, "Can you wait outside for your ride? I need to go to sleep." She replied, "I can't leave." I said, "You could wait outside. You can't be in here." That's when she started to cry. I told her I'm sorry for whatever had happened to her, but you really can't be in here. She looked up at me and smiled and asked, "Can I use your bathroom before I leave?" I pointed to the bathroom and she went into it without closing the door. I grabbed my phone from the coffee table and dialed 911, but it wouldn't go through. I yelled, "You need to leave, now." I heard nothing from her. That's when I peeked into the bathroom, and what I saw will haunt me forever. She was scratching at her face and smiling in the mirror. I saw that and ran to my room and locked the door. I kept yelling that I was calling the police. I heard her giggle and say, "I told you I can't leave." I just wanted to cry. I was shaking and I didn't know what to do. I just kept telling myself that I'm strong. I'm strong. About 5 minutes went by, and I heard knocking on the door again. And it sounded exactly the same as it did before, like the situation was in replay. I peeked out my window to see if it was a concerned neighbor, but no, it was her, again. I sprinted to my door to lock it, but it already was. I was paralyzed in fear. How could she lock my door from the inside and be out? I cracked my window open and threw out a sweatshirt with $20 in it. I yelled, "Get a cab. Hitch a ride, just leave me alone." She didn't touch the sweatshirt or the money and just sat there on my steps like she was waiting for me. I began pounding the connecting wall to my neighbor's house. I dialed 911 again, and it finally went through. As I explained the situation to the dispatcher, I peeked out the window to see her gone, along with my sweatshirt, and I felt the biggest relief. Needless to say, I didn't sleep the rest of that morning. And as I left for work, I opened my door to see my $20 bill on the doorstep. Although it wasn't my $20 bill, it looked brand new and crisp. I picked it up and ran to my car and left for work. I'm not exactly sure what I experienced that night, but I know I'll never forget it. Signed, Hannah. Number 5. Dear Tattooed Biker, in 2015, around the end of April, beginning of May, I was in Oregon for work. I worked for a company that handled the customer service member privilege point of sale system with Planet Fitness, and I was there checking in a few locations. Since Planet Fitness is a 24/7 establishment, I had to cater to all the shifts and would show up to each club multiple times during the day and night. One night, around 11:30 p.m., I was heading to the PF location in Beaverton, Oregon. My rental car had Bluetooth, and I was currently playing a coast-to-coast AM episode through the car's speakers. The episode was a George Norrie episode, and he had on Rosemary Ellen Guiley on to talk about the gin. I remember this fact to be true, though, because George brought up the Black-Eyed Kids phenomenon to her, and she felt like it was gin-related. Looking back, that was a serious coincidence because what happened when I arrived at the club chilled me to the core. Now, I'm a smoker. It's a nasty habit, but it's my vice. And when I arrived at the club, I decided to smoke in the parking lot with my driver's side window open to my rental so I could continue to listen to Coast to Coast and not be in the car because, well, the rental company, they fine you a couple of $100 for smoking inside. Now, the Planet Fitness there is in an L-shaped strip mall. Now, I don't entirely remember all the stores in that strip mall, but the PF is all the way to the end, and all the way to the left is a pharmacy of some kind. My passenger side was parallel to the Planet Fitness, and that was about 30 feet from the streetlight. The pharmacy was about 75 yards away and obviously closed. I was leaning against the car smoking and playing on my phone, and looked up at the pharmacy. In the light of the marquee-style sign, I could see two people standing right outside of it. For it being near midnight, I thought about how weird it was that someone would be standing outside the obviously closed pharmacy, but the thought was fleeting, and I was quickly face down in my phone again looking at Facebook. After a few seconds, I look up, and I noticed the two people, which I could now tell were kids or teenagers, were about 20% closer. This struck me as odd, and I didn't see them walking to that spot. They were just suddenly there, looking, and now was my soul, it seemed like. But more accurately, was my general direction. Now, from this distance, I could tell they were both wearing hooded sweatshirts. They were dark in color, and both kids had their hoods up. They were in an area just outside the streetlight glow. It shone on them, but not enough to see very clearly. Looking back, this should have raised some flags, but once again, I was back in my phone. I remember about this time, George and his guest were talking about evil spirit attachments from the Middle East and items and devices service members brought back home with them. Well, now I glanced back up, and the kids were about 30 feet away. They were once again outside the direct streetlight glow, but I could see them much clearer. This time, their heads were aimed down, and I couldn't see their faces, but I could make out their clothes. One had an olive drab, green hooded sweatshirt with no visible markings or insignia. The hoodie was up over the top of what appeared to be a gray ball cap, and once again no markings or insignia. Baggy, nondescript blue jeans, and black low-top shoes with no markings of any kind. The other was dressed very similar, the only difference being a navy blue zip-up hoodie and hood up over what looked like a black ball cap. Khaki pants and white shoes, same as the first, with no brands or any kind on any articles of clothing. The kids were standing still. I still hadn't seen them move to their current location, and they were almost frozen there, not moving at all. I don't know how or why, but I just went back to my phone, seemingly not bothered. I got a weird feeling almost instantly and looked up, and there they were. Not 5 feet in front of me and not moving, just closer. Just outside the shine of that streetlight. Still at ease, I tossed the cigarette butt underneath the car and asked, "What's going on, guys? Is there anything I can do for you?" The response I got was probably the most awkward thing in the story, but before I share it, I want you to know that I noticed that just prior to their response, their clothes were weird. They were too big. Not too big like kids wore in the 90s, but too big like hand-me-downs, and they were faded. Everything they wore you could tell the colors of, but it was like they were just kind of dingy, I guess. I could tell by the physical build that these kids were males, and by size I would say around 15. So after I asked if there was anything that I could do for them, here was their response. And the best way I can think to express how weird it was is just to lay it out. Well, I swear, those kids spoke in unison. So I say to them, "Is there anything that I can do for you guys?" And they responded together, "Please, kind sir, may we borrow a cigarette? It's very lonely at night. We only need one cigarette. Thank you, please." After they finished speaking in unison, they slowly lifted their heads to show me their faces. I remember thinking that it's kind of late for teenagers to be out on a Thursday, and almost as if they plucked that from my head, I hear them say in unison, "It's quite all right. We have permission." As soon as permission rolled off the kids' lips, their faces were level with mine, showing me solid, jet black eyes. I froze. My mind was going about 1,000,000 miles an hour because, damn it, I know what black-eyed kids are. Well, not what they are, but I know about them. I couldn't move or speak all of a sudden. Their faces were almost the definition of blank, almost, because the edges around their slit, straight mouth began to curl up ever so slightly, but you could see it. The inside of my stomach began to get cold, and with all my might I tried to turn my face, but for some reason I couldn't. The second kid took a step forward. The movement of shoes caught my eyes, and I broke eye contact. I looked down, and the moment the eye contact was broken, everything I knew about the black-eyed kids encountered rushed into my head, and I turned around and ran into the club. Now, when I say that I ran, I sprinted in loafers, and all 6'1", 250 pounds of me screamed the whole way. The young kids who worked at the counter just stared at me when I came bursting in. I tried my best to explain, but they weren't cool enough to have heard about the black-eyed kids. I looked out the plate glass front and saw 2 of them, standing side by side facing the club. When I saw them, chills ran down my spine, and I quickly concluded my business, and I left there, not seeing them as I went to my car or as I drove away. I ended up quitting that job soon after, so I would never have to return to that location. Thanks for reading. Signed, Anonymous. And there it is. All I have for tonight. So, these black-eyed beings, what do you think they are? Supernatural entities, cryptids, demonic forces, or something else entirely? I'd love to hear your thoughts and theories down in the comments below, but please, keep it respectful for the witnesses who submitted their reports. And if you have had a brush with the unexplained and would like to share your story, just send it to the email address in the description, and your experience may just wind up in a future video. Anyways, thanks so much for riding with me tonight. I appreciate you all. And until next time, stay curious, Stay vigilant, stay safe, and I'll be seeing you on down the road a ways. Biker, out.